turn the room from one event to another. It's very much appreciated. My name's John O'Connell. I'm the Chief Executive of the Taxpayers Alliance, and it's a delight to welcome our friends from the Heritage Foundation to host today's In Conversation with Lord Frost. And hosting the In Conversation is Niall Gardner, who is the director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the US-based Heritage Foundation. He is also a former aide to Prime Minister Thatcher. Lord Frost is a former diplomat and civil servant. He was Minister of State at the Cabinet Office and Chief Negotiator during Britain's exit from the EU. They'll be covering a wide range of topics today, of course, one of them being the new government's agenda, Brexit, of course, and foreign policy, and much more besides. So with that in mind, I'll hand over to you, Niall, but a thanks from the Taxpayers Alliance for working with Heritage Foundation and with our friend Lord Frost too.
Thank you very much for that very kind invitation, and a big thank you to Taxpayers Alliance for working with the Heritage Foundation to host today's very timely discussion with Lord Frost. Lord Frost has been, in my view, an outstanding Thatcherite conservative for many decades. He's a very good friend of ours at the Heritage Foundation. Had the privilege of hosting Lord Frost recently at the Heritage Foundation for an address there. And David, we're going to jump straight into the questions. We've got a great audience here with us today, and thank you everybody for joining us. David, I'm going to kick off with a question about the Prime Minister's U-turn on the 45 pence top rate tax. You've already, I think, given an interview as well this morning on LBC with your views on this. For the benefit of our audience today, David, what is your overall assessment of the Prime Minister's U-turn? What is going to be the impact upon her premiership? Is this a wise move for the Prime Minister? What risks are involved?
Well, thank you, Niall. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I mean, I supported Liz for the job she's now in, as is known, and I very much think that the country needs the direction of travel that she is trying to set. We need to move away from conventional thinking about the economy and get back to generating growth, getting incentives right, all this sort of things I've written and talked about a lot, and I know Liz agrees with all of that. Now, the problem we've got is that for the last decade, or maybe even longer, nobody has really talked about free market economics much in the public debate. The famous John Byrne-Murdoch graph from the FT over the weekend shows how far the debate has moved leftwards. And we can't just pretend this has not happened. That is the environment that we are working within. These are the people we've got to persuade. And you can't just do no persuasion or explanation, land a lot of radical measures and expect everybody to sort of cheer. It's really important to explain why we're setting the right direction, persuade people that it's going to be better. Explain what we're trying to do, why growth is important, why it's better for the economy. That takes time. We have to win the arguments. We've got to build the coalition. It also means not taking on fights that you can't win. I think the U-turn has been damaging because it has shown that we can U-turn. And clearly the outbreak of indiscipline over the last 24 hours shows that people are fighting for their preferred thing and trying to get what's up for grabs. So pick your battles, set the direction, make sure you bring people with you so that this stuff sticks over the last 18 months and we aren't forced into premature defeat and risk losing everything. And that's the worry that I have as I look at the scene at the moment.
Yes. And David, to follow up on that, we've seen quite a rebellion from the left of the Conservative Party. Back in the 1980s, they would be referred to as wets on this. Do you think there's a real danger of a sort of civil war within the Conservative Party right now? And how much of a threat to the Prime Minister's leadership is posed by the left of the Conservative Party. Perhaps there are some similarities as well to the rebellion against Boris Johnson over Brexit within the Conservative Party as well. Do you see clear parallels there?
So I mean, I think indiscipline has kind of seeped into the party a bit. And you know, look, I obviously have spent a lot of time writing this year criticising the direction of travel, albeit not while I was a minister. So I think people have the right to make a case up to a point. What the PM needs to do, what the team around her need to do, what senior ministers need to do is be clear about what they are going to do, what battles they're going to fight, which battles they're not going to fight, and get people in behind them. And you know, every time there is hesitation about questions like, are we going to uprate benefits or not, there's a row. If you know the PM won't immediately express confidence in the Chancellor, there's a row. These sort of things need to be shut down. There needs to be clarity about what we're trying to do and why, and get people in behind it.
Yes, yeah. All excellent points. And could you comment as well, David, on the timing of this U-turn announcement, the beginning of the Conservative Party conference? Strikes me as very high risk. What are your thoughts on the timing of this, actually?
Well, I mean, you make a mistake, there's no good moment to correct it. And I think, you know, don't get me wrong, I'm obviously in favour of reducing the tax and getting rid of the 45% rate. But as I say, you have to choose your battles and persuade people again why tax rates that are lower are better. I think you know, there's no good moment. If it had run through the conference knowing there was a plan to concede at the end, that would also not have been good. You know, there's just no good way out of this once you make the misjudgment. I mean, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Foresight is an even better thing, and it'd be best not to get into this in the first place.
Yes. And you worked very closely with Boris Johnson. Earlier as a special advisor when he was Foreign Secretary, and later as a minister in his government. And what lessons should Liz Truss learn from the demise of Boris Johnson?
Well, I mean, first thing to say is, you know, I was very sorry Boris had to go. I'm afraid I think he did have to by the end for reasons we all know about. But you know, he was a great guy and a great communicator and a great politician, and I don't think he's off the scene forever in some way or other. I do think that you know, communication isn't enough, and perhaps Boris showed that. You need to have a clear agenda that people can understand and get behind, and you need to, when you've taken a decision, you need to stick to it, which is why you need to make sure you're taking the right decisions as far as possible. And you know, I think Boris never quite reconciled the differences, you know, maybe within himself as well, between the kind of free marketeer, economic liberal, and the guy who believed the state should put its arms around everybody. And you know, that played out right to the end, and it probably doesn't work well. So, you know, what I would learn is, you know, at the micro level, get a team you're confident with, you know, make sure they're experienced people and you listen to them, but, you know, and genuinely take advice, try and bring people with you, but when a decision is taken, it's taken, and you try and get it done.
Yes. And you probably know Boris Johnson better than anyone in the sort of the Westminster world, really, all the years of experience alongside him. Do you think that Boris will be, you know, back on the political front lines at some stage in the future? Well, what's your sense on that?
Well, I mean, he's a very talented politician and a remarkable thinker in many ways, actually, I would say. my frustration with him was that he never quite grasped what you need to run a government and make it work effectively, and wouldn't take the advice from people around him as to how to do it, and that is the frustration. But there's plenty of room for him to have a role in British public life. Of course, I can't quite see him coming back as a minister or anything else, but there are plenty of other things people can do in public life, and I would expect he'll be interested in doing them.
Yes. And David, there was a lot of speculation about yourself possibly joining the cabinet, do you have any regrets about not going into government? You certainly had an opportunity, I believe, to do so, but any thoughts on that, and also your long-term political future?
So, I mean, I don't want to sort of go into all the discussions I had, obviously, with the PM. I was sounded out about a couple of roles, neither of which I think would have been the right ones for me and for her, more importantly. I don't think they played to what I know about and good at, and I think that's probably all that should be said on that subject. And I was clear to her that it was sort of no hard feelings, and I very much supported her, and that's what I've tried to do so far. My own plans, it kind of, I'm still, a lot of people say to me I should try for a common seat. That is possible under the new dispensation. I know there are places, associations that would be interested. I'm still sort of mulling it over, to be honest. I came to politics quite late. I haven't developed the sort of thick skin that a lot of politicians seem to have, and so I don't know whether I want to keep contributing to the debate. Whether that is the right thing for me and the party and everybody else, I'm still wondering about. I can't wonder forever.
And without a doubt, I think you're an extremely important voice on the future direction of the Conservative Party. And looking ahead to general election course of the next couple of years or so, Labour has a lead at the moment of 30 points or so, but 2 years is a very long time in politics. But if we did have a socialist government back in power here, what would be the implications for the future of Brexit, for example, especially if Labour had to enter a coalition with the SNP, Liberals and so on? And what would be the implications for Britain's future? Keir Starmer has pledged not to roll back Brexit, but as we know with Labour politicians, they can be often masters of disinformation, and who knows what they'll do actually in power, especially if they have to form a coalition with with the SNP, for example. I mean, in fact, the very future of the United Kingdom could be put into doubt. What are the risks involved if Britain lurches to the left in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so, I mean, first thing to say is I don't share the despair that, seems to be widely spread around this conference, that the election is already lost. I absolutely do not believe that. There are 2 years or whatever till the next election. Anyone can see that the turbulence there has been in British politics and the unexpected nature of so many developments. Anyone who predicts the next 2 years are already just playing it out to the Labour victory. I mean, that is just foolish. I think if it is still very much in the government's hands, if it gets the reform programme right and explains the consequences, sets out why, builds a coalition of people who want to do the right thing by the country, then all that needs to be done. And it can be done and should be done. So I don't give up on this at all. What would worry me is if we did lose, and let's hope that doesn't happen. My worry would be that we lose having shown that we ourselves cannot implement the sort of reforms that are needed. In other words, we give up. We sort of mess up the handling and the communication and the policy substance. It all goes wrong in the next few months. We don't get the sort of reform. We don't get the same sort of track that we need. You know, at that point, it will be very easy for Labour to say, well, we tried your way. You know, you couldn't do it. We tried your form of Brexit. It lasted a month or 3 months or whatever. Now let's do something else. And that will be a strong argument if we allow ourselves to fail. In those circumstances, I mean, you know, I personally find it incredible to believe that Keir Starmer has suddenly decided he likes leaving the customs union, the single market, and thinks that's the best thing for Britain. I think everything about his politics in the last few years shows that isn't what he believes at all. And the only thing that's keeping him in that position is the sense that the Conservative Party may yet derive benefit from what it did over Brexit. If we blow it ourselves, then of course I think we'll have a Labour agenda that takes us back close to or into the single market and everything else as quickly as they can do it.
Yes.
And you know, we risk being our own worst enemy in that if we don't get things right in the next few months.
Yeah, there's a striking sort of sense of defeatism among some elements of the Conservative Party, and but it's a very long way to go before the next general election, and plenty of time for the Conservatives to fight back, really.
Yes, we must not get into the mood that we got into, so many people got into in 2019, which is that, you know, nothing can be done. We've tried everything and they don't work. We need to hand it over to some other constellation of people who know what they're doing. You know, there are kind of elements of that around at the moment, and it's very important not to give in to that.
Yes, and against all odds, of course, you delivered a Brexit in the negotiations when so many said it could not be done, and you spent a huge amount of time, of course, negotiating with your EU counterparts. And I'm going to switch now to Europe.
Yeah.
And firstly on the Northern Ireland Protocol, and you have a great deal of in-depth knowledge on this issue. What does the Prime Minister need to do with regard to the protocol, and what are the immediate steps that she needs to take?
Yeah, I mean, every time on the protocol, people say I wouldn't have started from here, and that's still true. I think at every stage that's been true. You know, we took a risk with the protocol. It was imperfect. It was the best choice out of a set of bad choices, in my view, that enabled us to get Brexit done and move on. And hoped it would have worked better than it has done. I think, you know, I'm slightly uncertain. I wouldn't put it any more strongly than that. I'm slightly uncertain what policy the government is trying to pursue on the protocol at the moment, because some of the signals seem to go in different directions. Steve Baker a couple of days ago, you know, apologising to the Irish for the mistakes we'd made supposedly in the process, or not having been respectful enough. Some people put a lot of emphasis on the negotiation route. Others put a lot of emphasis on the bill route and the override route. And I'm not quite sure what signal the government wants to give at the moment, and I think it could usefully kind of clarify that at first. If I've learned anything from negotiating with the Europeans, it's that if you're not clear what you want yourself, you definitely won't get any of the things that you want. And so being really unambiguous about that's really important. I think we have to recognise that Northern Ireland is a full part of this United Kingdom, but that there are special features of Northern Ireland politics that need to be taken into account, and the Good Friday Agreement's obviously the most important of those. And that's why I think if a good negotiated settlement can be achieved, then that would be the best way through this. The problem is that a good negotiated settlement means the EU moving very, very significantly on a lot of things that it said it won't move on. Now, that might happen. Sometimes it does happen. But the odds are probably against it happening in current circumstances. And therefore, I think the government is going to be forced to carry on with the protocol bill, override bits of the protocol, bring the trading arrangements of Northern Ireland back fully within the UK. So that's where we need to get to. A normalisation to a very large extent of the changing and single market arrangements. How you get there, you've got to be very clear about what you are prepared to live with, what we're not prepared to live with, and what the preferred route for getting there is. And I worry some of the clarity is being lost just at the moment on that.
Right. So there's certainly a moment for robust leadership from the Prime Minister, and she has talked on a number of occasions about how she's going to take a tough stand on this. There's been a lot of menacing talk from the Biden presidency with regard to the Northern Ireland Protocol issue. The Prime Minister has said that the issue of US-UK trade deal is no longer on the immediate table, in part to deflect the threats coming from the Biden presidency.
I think so.
But what's your response to the very aggressive attacks coming from the White House, but also especially from Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and extraordinary intervention by a US administration, very unhelpful, and frankly treating Britain as an adversary on this issue, and repeating word for word basically the talking points of the European Commission.
Yeah. I mean, keep out is my message, to be honest. I think, the circumstances in which the Good Friday Agreement was created in the late 90s are obviously very difficult to the circumstances of now. In the late 90s, politics was very different, the threat of violence was very different, American involvement, international involvement was helpful in sort of balancing the different forces and enabling us to get to the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That's not the case now. It's very, very different in many, many respects. And involvement from the US on the basis, I think, of not really understanding what's going on and what the history is here is actively destabilizing. It's encouraging hard lines which make this more difficult to settle rather than less. And I really wish there could be a bit more sort of sensitivity to this. And sometimes it feels like this government is not regarded as a respectable government in the US and not really fit to kind of handle matters within its own country. And that is quite wrong. And it is not how the Americans treat us on other policy issues and shouldn't be on this either.
Yes, excellent point, Steve. And also very striking that the Biden presidency, or officials, advisors around the president, launched what could only be described as a series of attacks on British economic policy in the last few days, especially over the tax cuts. And I thought a bit rich of the Biden presidency to be lecturing the UK on economic matters, considering the financial disaster that you're seeing unfolding in the United States with $30 trillion of national debt, soaring in inflation, stock markets crashed this year, and on so many fronts, the Biden presidency, the last administration in the world to be offering any advice to the United Kingdom.
I agree. I mean, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, one of the most misnamed acts in history, I think. This sort of massive ballooning in borrowing, and meanwhile the American tax rate is top tax rate is 37%, and yet we are criticised for these sort of changes. So, I mean, obviously, I don't want to get sort of I want to overplay this. There are plenty of people, even in this American administration, who understand perfectly well what's going on and would not share the, the very left-wing Democrat perspective of some of these questions.
Yes.
But that is what is being heard, and it is encouraging people who, do not support the goals of this government, which I think are the right goals.
Yes, exactly. I'll ask a couple more questions, then I'm going to actually invite questions from the audience, if that's okay, David. And on the foreign policy front, China, immense challenges posed by the Chinese Communist Party to the free world, not least to the United Kingdom. What's your advice to the Prime Minister with regard to China policy, and does the British government need to be a lot tougher on communist China, and what measures should be taken with regard to standing up to the China threat?
Yeah, so I think 10, 15 years ago, if you looked at China, it was possible to make the argument that very, very slowly the Communist Party was allowing a degree of sort of discussion and debate about the direction of travel, and that there might be a course for China which was not just ending up in a sort of dictatorship, and a very authoritarian one at that. I think it's much harder to make that argument now. In fact, it's probably impossible to make it, and we have to draw the conclusions of that. I've definitely changed my own mind about where China is going, for what that's worth. I'm far from an expert on the subject, but I think generally the British establishment has changed its mind on China over the same period, and it is right to draw the conclusions from that. China's a huge, powerful country. It will always have big influence on what happens in the world, and you have to deal with the world as it is. But I do think we should be increasing our own resilience on that. We should be looking more carefully about how welcoming or otherwise we are to Chinese investment. I'm very worried about the amount of Chinese money that goes into universities, the degree of sort of espionage and elite capture that is going on, and we need to be very careful about that ourselves. The pure foreign policy side of things, we have AUKUS, we have our Indo-Pacific tilt. We're never going to be the major player in there, but we are an important player in the Indo-Pacific, or can be, if we do the right thing. And building a coalition to deter China from destabilizing actions as far as we can is really important. And I think we need to do that and not hesitate about it.
Yes. And a last question actually on the, this is an issue you've very closely followed. It's on the Iran nuclear deal. And the Iran issue, of course, looms large in terms of foreign policy priorities, both the US and British governments. And Iran is seeing the biggest protests that we've seen in many decades. And for the first time, this Islamist dictatorship is facing massive opposition on the streets. And in the wake of this, and in the wake of very strong condemnation from conservatives, especially in the United States, of this idea of reviving the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, a deal with the world's biggest state sponsor of terrorism. What is your message to the British government that was also party to the JCPOA, still in favour of reviving the deal despite some very strong opposition within the United States among conservatives? But what do you think the Prime Minister should be doing on this front with regard to the negotiations with Iran?
So I think the PM is a sceptic about the JCPOA and the Iran deal. Certainly some of the things she's said suggest that she is. I think, I was always a sceptic about JCPOA myself. I think the time has definitely passed, and if you believe that a deal with Iran is going to stop it getting a nuclear weapon, then you're kidding yourself. I wrote a piece a few months back describing, for those who are old enough to remember, The Iran deal was like the bridge on the River Kwai. You know, we'd kind of forgotten why we were doing it. We just wanted to get it done. And it feels like that. I think the only thing that has deterred Iran is a very strong regional coalition against it and a willingness to push back wherever it tries something. Of course, we must stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon. We see from Ukraine how difficult things get when you're dealing with a nuclear power. But you know, we need to be serious. We need to see the world as it is. The idea that, you know, a few pieces of paper are going to deter Iran from its ambitions, stop it getting a bomb, stop its regional ambitions, just seems to me like a sort of fantasy world.
Yeah.
That, you know, whatever the policy is, it isn't that. We don't start from that. We need to get real about it.
Excellent advice for the new British government. I'm going to open the floor to questions. We do have a lot of questions here, and I shall do my best to pick out questioners in order. But I'm going to actually start with a question right here in front from Isabel Oakeshott.
Thank you. Isabel Oakeshott, I'm the international editor at Talk TV. Can I just ask a very broad question? How do you feel Brexit is going so far? I say this as a Brexiteer, by the way.
Well, I mean, it's all taken a bit longer than we would ideally have wanted, probably. You know, the very prolonged sort of inability to deliver after 2016 made life a lot more difficult. It created the sense that, you know, a lot more was up for grabs than it needed to be, and has generated this long debate about things. I do hope we're kind of past that now, but obviously a lot of time has been lost, and we are doing economic reform in a global environment that's a lot more difficult. So, you know, again, ideally I wouldn't be starting from here. I still think it is the right thing because it gives us control. It gives us the ability to respond to the challenges in the best possible way, and haltingly, slowly, we are nevertheless doing that, and it is beginning to make a difference. You know, people always say to me, hostile commentators always say to me, can you just give me one benefit of Brexit? Just give me one. And for me, that's a sort of infallible sign that this person, you know, absolutely hates Brexit and wishes that they'd never have it. But there are many, but the biggest is democracy. Running your own affairs, being in control of your own country is really important.
Thanks for that terrific answer, David. And I'm going to call on the gentleman right here in the middle with his hand raised. Yes, yeah. Yeah.
Lord Frost, I'm Abdul Mateen from the Isle of Wight Conservative Association. We need to pay back the national debt at some point. Our interest we're paying is 100% GDP. At some point, we want to live in a surplus where we no longer need to borrow. How are we going to do that? How are we going to pay off the debt we owe? And how are we going to live like Japan and other countries who live on a surplus? Thank you.
So the short answer is a country deals with debt by growing. There are hardly any examples of a country that's tried to sort of consolidate down the debt by running prolonged surpluses on year on year. That is extremely difficult to do. You know, where it happens, it only happens under extreme international pressure, like some of the Eurozone countries. It is very difficult to do. What you've got to do is grow the economy so that the debt declines as a share of GDP, and that is what we've failed to focus on. So countries can sustain quite high levels of debt, provided their economic policy framework is credible and they look like they are growing effectively. And the problem we've had over the last 10, 15 years is that growth has been low, productivity has been low. We've got into this low growth trap that is making everything more difficult. So, you know, however difficult it is, and it is difficult and it must be explained properly, that is the only way out of this. that I can see, and it is the right way out of it. It's the way it's been done before. We know it works.
Great. Actually, I'm going to call on this gentleman right here in the front. Yes, yeah.
Hello. Thank you, Lord Frost, for your enthusiasm that we can get back after yesterday's U-turn. It's pretty bad. It's attacked Liz on one of her main points, and that was her strength. Do you have any practical ideas about how she might be able to recover after what's pretty, in my view, almost fatal view on both her and her policies?
Well, I think I think she has to sort of pause slightly, not take on new battles, focus on explaining what has already been announced and what's in the growth plan, what it will take to deliver that. None of this has been sort of explained or communicated properly. Don't make any more U-turns, therefore don't take on stuff that might mean you've got to make a U-turn. And don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The crucial thing is to get on the right track. And I worry that they've drawn the wrong conclusion from the short period to the general election, that people are saying that we've only got 18 months, therefore we need to rush at everything so people notice the effects. People will definitely notice what this government does, come what may. The crucial thing is to explain, get on the right path, build a mandate so that when the election comes we can win it and we get another 4 or 5 years of these policies. So I guess my advice is, pause, concentrate on getting us through this winter without more difficulties. Come out in March, April, reinvigorated to push some more things forward. And probably, I think, the team around her probably needs refreshing already, and maybe some new voices. I mean, it's obvious that the party is a bit disaffected, and a bit of reaching out probably needs to be done, I think.
Excellent. And so I'm going to call the gentleman over there standing up. I shall get to the other questions in a minute. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Tony Samuels, a former private sector chairman of a bank and a former public sector chairman of a county council. For me, David, it's blindingly obvious what your next job is if you were on my committee, and it's up there on the board. Chief Negotiator. We need trade deals in the world desperately. What's not mentioned is the billions we're missing out on with our 3 major markets, China, USA, EU. We've had a few from Australia, New Zealand, with the greatest of respect. David, how about the job?
Well, I'm in the Prime Minister's hands on that sort of thing. I think let's see what happens. On the trade question, I actually I think we have to keep reminding ourselves of the fact that the benefits of trade don't only come from exports, they come from imports, and competition in your own economy is what drives productivity and growth. And at the moment we are still running a trade policy that's a giant preference scheme for the European Union. They've got 0 tariffs, nobody else has, and I would like to see us getting down our tariffs down much more quickly over time, maybe a bit more slowly for some sensitive products, but generally, let's get an open trade policy to the world. We don't need to pay a price to China or anybody else to get these benefits. We can do it ourselves quite quickly, and I think it's one thing the government could do quite quickly to give a fillip and to show the markets and the international scene we were serious about competition and growth and changing things in our own market.
Very well said, David. And you're getting multiple sort of job offers and recommendations today. And let's see. There's a lady right near the back there. So I'm going to call on you if you would like to stand up. Yeah.
Thank you, Niall. Lord Frost, I'm Amanda Craig from the Northern Ireland Conservatives, and I'd like to ask if the chief benefit of Brexit is sovereignty, as I quite agree it is, and I'm a passionate Brexiteer. Does that apply to the people of Northern Ireland who are now governed by European laws for whom they have no elected representative? And what is the long-term implication of that for the United Kingdom if it is indeed united?
Well, I think I partly answered that talking about the protocol earlier. I think it is important to keep in mind that, first of all, we knew with the protocol that these arrangements were in principle undemocratic and not acceptable, and that's why there is a consent vote in 2024. Now, everybody keeps talking as if that doesn't exist or pretending it doesn't really matter, but it does, and it should be important. And who knows how many more elections there'll be in Northern Ireland between now and 2024. Don't take the current balance of forces as necessary final on this subject. He needs consent wherever it ends up, and that is really important. So I absolutely agree with where you're coming from. In my own defence, which I don't do very often on this subject because we know the difficulties. Northern Ireland is subject to a lot of the EU's rules for the single market for goods and products. That is not the same thing as being left behind in the European Union. For most aspects of its national life, Northern Ireland is not in the European Union. It's fully part of the UK. Even trade in services, which is 70% of trade, is fully part of the UK. And in fact, when I last went to Northern Ireland, I found quite a lot of grumbling about the new trade barrier that had been established between the Northern Ireland and the Republic on services. So, I absolutely get the politics, but I don't think it is really fair to say Northern Ireland's been left behind. We worked very hard to make sure that was not the case, and I very much hope that we can do more in the remaining loose ends, as it were, of this over the next year or two.
Yeah. Gentleman right here in the front had his hand up for quite a while.
Lord Frost, is the Governor of the Bank of England's position tenable?
So I know I'm not in the government and not capable of shaking markets on my own, but even so, I think I will be cautious answering that question. I think I personally think I think two things actually. I think the bank has been a bit slow. I think that's generally acknowledged in getting ahead of where the economy is and in raising interest rates. Having said that, I think it is. I don't entirely think they're unreasonable in thinking. Where does this take the economy? Inflation is at 9%. So if you take a sort of kind of Taylor rule of thumb things, you'd be looking at interest rates of 11, 12%. Well, the economy will collapse under that. I think it is reasonable to have a discussion about how much higher do interest rates have to go. They have to go higher because sub-zero rates are damaging to the motor of capitalism, to what makes free markets work. But I do think at the same time, simply kind of ignoring the real economy and just pushing up rates as if nothing else mattered is also problematic. So I do get they've got a problem here. I think probably they've erred a bit too much on the side of caution, but I don't think it's entirely fair to say that nothing else matters. It is a difficult judgment here.
The lady just over here on the left, yeah.
Hi, Linda Mitchell from Carlisle. We got rid of one Prime Minister because she wouldn't deliver Brexit. We got one Prime Minister because he managed it. Do you think it would be self-defeating for the Conservative Party if we managed to try and get rid of a third, whatever the reason?
Of course. It is incredible that we're even sort of talking about this, I think, in these sectors. It's obviously absurd, obviously ridiculous. And, I think we make the party look ridiculous and the country look ridiculous if we are talking about that. It ought to be possible to distinguish between, some significant errors of judgment were made. A recalibration needs to take place, but we can get on track. That is one thing. And to say, the reaction to every problem is the leader must be changed is just absurd, I think. So. Let's make ourselves look serious as a party, and focus on the policies and what we need to get through. Nobody gets everything right all the time. I don't think it's not that surprising that this first few weeks has not gone perfectly. That does happen. The important thing is to be able to correct your errors, recognise what the problem is, and move on from it. And I don't see any reason why that shouldn't happen.
David, I'm going to jump in quickly with a question for you on the migrant crisis, and a huge issue for Conservative voters, also closely watched across the Atlantic as well. In the United States, there's massive problems with illegal migration. Could you comment on what the new British government should be doing in terms of dealing with the migrant crisis? What action is necessary? And do you have any confidence in French President Emmanuel Macron actually helping Britain out at all? After all, his track record is much to be desired, I think, leaves much to be desired on multiple fronts. Are we going to be able to work with the French on this, or is Macron just determined to knife Britain in the back?
So I mean, much though it goes against the grain not to sort of rubbish the French all the time. I do actually sort of think that occasionally they get a sort of slightly negative press on this. They have not done as much as they could, but they do stop about, I forget what the figure is, a quarter to the third of migrants. They should be doing more, but it's not true to say they do nothing. I think the practical collaboration amongst agencies is a lot better than the rhetoric amongst the leaders, and that has also got to be taken into account. Having said that, I don't think it is for us to tell the French they must solve our problem. In the end, we must police our own borders, and most people would think having a sea border is an advantage, not a problem from the point of view of trying to police it. And I think that's why people find it so hard to understand why we can't do something about this. I do. Personally, I think the problem is that it is multifaceted. One of the problems is that we simply do not process asylum claims quickly enough. We do not deport people when they haven't, when they have wrongly claimed asylum. The whole system is clogged up, which is an obvious incentive for people to try it. So we should try and fix that ourselves. I think we might well have to end up derogating from parts of the ECHR, in my view. I think we should try not to, because it does have reputational value, but I do think controlling your borders is really important, and if it turns out that's the only way to do it, then I think the government's going to have to contemplate it. And I think the debate on that has shifted over the last year and probably will continue to shift.
Thanks very much, David. And so the gentleman right here in the middle, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. Michael Bracken from Beaconsfield. Lord Frost, I want to ask you about the civil service. This government has a very aggressive deregulation agenda. Does the civil service have the depth of skills and willingness to deliver that and help do the hard work for it?
I'm always a bit cautious answering this. This question always comes up. Everything I do, and I'm always a bit cautious because my other half is a senior civil servant, so people kind of sometimes read in more than there really is. I actually think that there are a lot of problems with the modern civil service. I think you identify the skills problem. It's a real one. that people with the skills don't stay in, and over time, the civil service become less effective in its sort of knowledge of policy and making it happen. I do also think that, so I think actually, personally, I think the Northcote Trevelyan model of the civil service is broken and needs reforming. I think there needs to be a more political element at the top of people coming in and out. That debate is going to take time. We should have a full debate about what the sort of civil service we need for a modern Britain, and we shouldn't kind of rush it. Last thing on this subject, though, I do think that ministers need allies, and what you can do in the short run is give ministers more special advisors. And I think ministers in return should move away from the sort of caricature special advisor of the sort of 25-year-old who's only ever been a politician and only knows about the media. Special advisors can be other sorts of people with other sorts of backgrounds. They can be older, they can be more experienced. And I think my experience is ministers need allies. They need people to help them drive the bureaucracy, to be on civil servants' case when they personally, as ministers, can't be, and to get things to happen. And I think it is a mistake to clamp down on the numbers of special advisors. I think the best thing the government could do to help itself and help ministers would be to expand them and get some more experienced, knowledgeable people who shared the government's objectives into the organisation.
Terrific answer, David. And this gentleman in the front has been tremendously patient, so I'm going to invite you to ask the next question. Thank you.
Hello. My name is David Adams. I'm from South Warwickshire, Jeremy Clark's constituency. I'm blind. I have a Jeremy Wright's constituency, sorry. I'm blind. I have a guide dog. One of the outcomes of Brexit was that I'm unable to travel with my guide dog into Europe now, at least if I want to go frequently. I wrote to you, you passed it to Zach Goldsmith passed it to DEFRA. I've written to Chloe Smith, and now trying the new minister who's totally unaware of it. What do I do? Who do I speak to? They managed it for racehorses. Why not guide dogs?
Well, I absolutely sympathise with your position on this, obviously. The truth of it is, obviously, is that there's only so much point in writing to UK ministers because the problem is the EU rules, that they will not relax their rules for what seems to me a perfectly good case. And unfortunately, what we're dealing with is the legacy of many, several years of extremely difficult dispute between us and the EU, and an unwillingness to kind of cut any slack. I hope our ministers are pressing this point. It's an obviously fixable point, and you should go on writing. But in the end, you should probably write to the Commission, and so keep up the pressure. I think is, I'm afraid, all I can say on that subject. These things are not all in our hands.
Thanks very much. What a beautiful guide dog as well.
Yes.
And thank you for that question. I think we have time for one last audience question, actually. It's going to be difficult to decide who that is. And let me see, it's going to be not an easy one. In fact, I'm going to ask the gentleman on the right-hand side over here, who's had his hand up for quite a while. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Tom Klaus-Pritchard. I'm the Outreach Director at the Pinsker Centre. Thank you so much. Wonderful session. I was wondering whether you thought there was anything the United Kingdom could do in the prevention of the new JCPOA coming in, which would really strengthen Iran and be a disaster not just for the region, but also for Europe, for the United Kingdom and the United States.
Yeah, so as I said, I think I'm not sure, I don't know whether the JCPOA is really going to get over the line anyway in the current environment. I think we should be clearer in saying that it is ineffective in dealing with the problem. I don't think we should allow ourselves as a country to be carried along with the others that signed the original deal. I just think we should be kind of clear about it. And the first, you've got to engage with reality. And signing the JCPOA simply won't solve the problem. We have to move on from that and work out what is going to have a greater chance of solving the problem and putting our weight behind that problem.
Thank you, David. And just one last final question for you. Some words of advice for Liz Truss as Prime Minister, based upon your many years working in government, but also, of course, dealing with the European Union, such a wide range of issues. And I have to say as well that I don't think we would be outside of the European Union today without your work and your dedication. So tremendously grateful to you, David. We're a free nation thanks to your work and your dedication and the work of so many who worked with you, David.
Absolutely.
And David, just in terms of some closing words of advice for the Prime Minister, facing very difficult circumstances, tough time for the PM, what would you say to her?
Gosh, I think reach out, be clear about what you think. Keep saying what you're trying to do and why, and try and bring people with you. Bring friends with you, make friends, build allies, build a coalition that can get things through. Because I think this party, has, it's got very fragmented, but I still think this party basically wants Conservative Prime Minister to succeed and has depths of loyalty to make that happen. So, reach out, try and build on this, build friends, and it can work.
Yes. Lord Frost, it's been a tremendous discussion. Thank you very much for joining us today, and some real words of wisdom, I think, for the new British government. And it's been a real privilege having this conversation with someone who literally changed the course of history for the better. So thank you, Dave, for all that you have done. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. It's been a wonderful discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you.